Beyond the Limits, Awaken the Creative Genius Within You. An original work by Oscar Gonzalez, created for Biblio Studio. Chapter 1. The First Step. Breaking the Invisible Cage. The mind is like a fire. It goes out if you don't feed it. Ancient Icelandic proverb. Imagine living in a vast house with dozens of rooms full of light and possibilities, but out of fear or habit, you always stay in the smallest and darkest one. Over time, you begin to believe that this single room is your entire world. The door to the other rooms is there, open, waiting, but you no longer look at it. That's how the mind works when it grows accustomed to limitation. It builds invisible bars and convinces itself it cannot leave. The first step toward awakening your creative genius is to recognize and break that cage which, though unseen, has the strength to confine entire lives. Most of those limitations don't come from the outside world, but from the phrases, beliefs, and judgments we've accepted without question. Since childhood, we've heard things like, "You're not good at this," "Creativity is a gift for a few," "You have to be realistic." Repeated over and over, such phrases end up functioning like chains. The curious thing is that, just as they were built, they can also be undone. All it takes is a mental act of rebellion, a spark of doubt, a gesture of defiance for the first crack to appear. Creativity doesn't begin with supernatural talent or a whimsical muse. It begins with a decision. The decision to feed the fire instead of letting it slowly die beneath the ashes of routine. Many people believe they are not creative because they've never written a book, painted a picture, or composed music. But creativity doesn't belong only to artists. It's present the moment you improvise a recipe with what you have on hand, when you invent a story to calm a child, or when you solve an everyday problem in an unexpected way. Each of those small actions is a spark. The problem is that habit and repetition act like water, slowly extinguishing it. The brain, designed to save energy, clings to what it knows and avoids the uncertain, even though uncertainty is where discoveries are born. We end up imprisoned not because we lack talent, but because we allow ourselves to be lulled to sleep by repetition. The story of the Russian poet Anna Akhmatova shows vividly what it means to keep the flame alive even in hostile circumstances. She lived under a regime that persecuted any word deemed dangerous. Her verses could cost her freedom or her life, but she never stopped writing. She would write on small scraps of paper, read them in a whisper to people she trusted, and then destroy them immediately. She wasn't seeking recognition or applause, not even permanence. Her writing was a vital act, a way of affirming her existence in the face of imposed silence. Those poems, many of which were never preserved, were proof that creativity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. If Akhmatova, surrounded by censorship and threats, found a way to feed her inner fire, what excuse do we have for extinguishing ours out of fear of ridicule, criticism, or failure? The creative process is more like bamboo than any other plant. The rose blooms quickly and withers soon after, but bamboo can spend up to 5 years without showing any visible growth, as if it were dead beneath the soil. Yet when its time comes, in just 6 weeks, it can rise 30 meters toward the sky. During those hidden years, it wasn't inactive. It was strengthening its roots, gathering the energy needed for explosive growth. So it is with ideas. We may spend months or years without visible results, with half-finished projects and apparent failures. What we don't see is that the mind is growing roots, that every book, every conversation, every experience becomes underground nourishment. The mistake many make is giving up too soon, convinced there is no fruit, when in reality, the seed is only maturing in silence. Breaking the invisible cage begins with recognizing it. Most of our limitations are phrases we've repeated until we believe them to be universal laws. I'm not good with numbers. I'm terrible at languages. I wasn't born creative, but none of them are absolute truths. They are cultural constructions, handed down opinions we've mistaken for dogmas. If you look into your own life, you'll find at least one moment that contradicts one of those phrases. That moment is the first crack in the cell. Identifying it and bringing it back to memory is like opening a gap through which light can enter. Each person feeds their spark in a different way, some through reading, others through music, others by exploring nature. What matters is understanding that the fire needs constant fuel. You don't have to wait for a lightning bolt of inspiration. You can exercise creativity like a muscle through small daily gestures, writing a few lines, doodling aimlessly, trying new combinations in the kitchen, reading about unfamiliar subjects. Each of those acts is like a small piece of kindling that keeps the fire alive. Of course, opening the cage means facing fear, fear of making mistakes, of being judged, of failing. But mistakes are not signs of incapacity. They are signs of movement. No one trips unless they're moving forward. And on the creative path, stumbles are part of the map. They show us which roads don't lead anywhere and bring us closer to those that do. Anna Akhmatova wrote, knowing she could lose everything. You, on the other hand, may only risk a criticism, a sarcastic comment, a failed attempt. Isn't that a small price to pay to keep your fire alive? The first step toward your creative genius is not to produce a great work or earn applause from others. It's something more intimate and simple, daring to open the first door of the invisible cage. Feed your mind as you would a fire that, if neglected, will die out. Trust that the bamboo's roots are strengthening, even if you can't see them. Accept that creativity is not a fixed destination, but a way of walking. This book will take you through the corridors you once thought closed within your mental house. You'll discover that the limits were only shadows disguised as walls, and you'll understand that creative genius is not a reserved gift, but a possibility waiting to be claimed. The question right now is simple. Will you stay in the small, dark room, or dare to step through the door? Chapter 2. Seeing where no one looks. The eye cannot see itself. It needs a reflection. Indian proverb. The greatest obstacle to creativity is not a lack of imagination, but the habit of always looking in the same direction. We grow accustomed to observing what everyone else observes, to thinking within the same boundaries, and to responding with formulas others have already approved. It's comfortable, of course. It's also safe. But that safety works like a distorted mirror. It always returns the same image, never allowing us to discover anything new. The eye, as the Indian proverb says, cannot see itself. It needs an external reflection to recognize its own form. In the same way, the creative mind doesn't discover itself by only looking inward, but by seeking unexpected reflections in unlikely places. The art of seeing where no one looks does not mean denying the known reality, but rather searching for angles others have overlooked. It's about learning to doubt what seems obvious, to question what everyone accepts without discussion, to wonder what hides just behind the surface of the evident. Creativity, in essence, is a game of perspectives. While most remain trapped on the surface, the creator dares to turn the gaze and find the crack through which another vision filters in. An extreme example of this act of seeing differently was embodied by the English painter Joseph Mallord William Turner. Considered one of the great masters of light and storm, Turner sought to capture not only the appearance of natural phenomena on his canvases, but their spirit. He could have painted storms from sketches, descriptions, or memory, yet he wanted to feel them in his own flesh. On one occasion, during a sea voyage, he asked to be tied to the mast of a ship in the middle of a raging tempest. There, soaked, battered by the wind, his eyes stung by salt, and his senses overwhelmed by the roar of the sea, he experienced the storm from within it. Later, that encounter became a painting that transcended mere description and became visceral. Turner understood that creativity demands exposure, to live what others avoid, to look straight into the chaos instead of taking refuge in distance. Turner's act reminds us that looking where no one looks is not always comfortable. It involves risk, discomfort, even fear. Yet it's the only way to reach an authentic vision. If we observe reality from the same places as everyone else, we will obtain the same images. Only those who dare to stand in a different position can see what remains hidden to others. And this is not limited to the arts. It happens in science, in business, and in daily life. The doctor who suspects a symptom others ignore, the inventor who combines tools no one thought to merge, the friend who perceives the sadness behind a smile, all of them practice that oblique gaze that reveals the invisible. Nature constantly demonstrates how seeing differently allows survival. There is a fascinating fish in the rivers of Southeast Asia, known as the archer fish. While most fish seek food beneath the water, this one has developed an astonishing strategy. It shoots jets of water at insects resting on branches and leaves above the surface. Its aim is remarkable. It calculates the angle, compensates for the refraction of light in the water, and adjusts the force of the shot to strike its prey with precision. That shift in perspective, refusing to limit itself to what is underwater, and instead seeking in the air what other fish cannot see, has given it a unique evolutionary advantage. The archer fish survives because it dares to look upward where no one else does. In truth, each of us can be like that archer fish. Most people look for solutions in familiar territory, but the creative genius is the one who dares to cast their gaze toward unconventional places. To ask, what if I reversed the process? What if I changed the natural order? What if I applied an idea from one field to another completely different one? It's an exercise in mental daring. Seeing where no one looks also means challenging the internal filters that shape our perception. We tend to see the world not as it is, but as we are, laden with prejudices, experiences, and expectations. That is the invisible cage from the previous chapter, now turned into an optical filter. That's why we need mirrors, external reflections that return to us a different image. Talking with someone from another culture, reading an author who contradicts our beliefs, traveling to an uncomfortable place, or studying a field that seems unrelated to ours, all of these act as mirrors that allow the eye to see itself from the outside. Turner found the reflection of the storm by placing himself within it. The archerfish found in the surface a reflection of its survival. We can find ours in the everyday, by listening to a child ask an absurd question that hides a profound truth, by observing the unexpected behavior of a stranger, by pausing at a detail no one else considers important. The key lies in keeping curiosity alert and trained, like a muscle ready to turn the head toward the unusual. A good way to practice this vision is to intentionally change our perceptual routines. Walk through an unfamiliar neighborhood. Use your non-dominant hand for simple tasks. Read a book from a genre you'd never choose. Listen to music you think you don't like. It's not whimsy. It's training the mind to see from unexplored angles. Just as Turner exposed himself to the storm, we expose ourselves to the disorder that opens new windows. Creativity flourishes when we stop expecting answers from the usual places. The eye needs a reflection to recognize itself. The mind needs strangeness to discover itself. What's surprising is that the most valuable reflection often isn't found in grand adventures or extreme experiences, but in what has always been before us, and we simply never noticed. The archerfish didn't travel to another ocean to find its strategy. It just looked upward, mere inches from its world. Perhaps your next creative spark isn't in distant ideas, but in learning to look differently at the everyday. Ultimately, seeing where no one looks is both an act of courage and humility. Courage to risk a change of perspective, humility to admit that the obvious might be hiding the essential. Only then can we break the circle of repetition and leap into the unexpected. Turner understood it when he tied himself to the mast. The archerfish understood it when it lifted its gaze. The Indian proverb reminds us of it still. We need a reflection to see ourselves. The question is, are you willing to direct your eyes where no one else dares, even if it means getting drenched in the storm? Chapter 3. The Alchemy of Curiosity. He who never doubts, never learns. Medieval Arabic saying. Curiosity is the secret engine behind all learning and all creativity. It does not arise from certainty, but from doubt. When someone believes they already know everything, they stop looking with wonder, and when they stop looking, they stop growing. Doubt is uncomfortable, I know, because it forces us to admit that our maps are incomplete, that what we believe to be solid may in fact be fragile. But doubt is also fertile. It is the soil where new ideas germinate. He who never doubts, never learns, says the ancient Arabic wisdom, and within that phrase lies the key to creative alchemy, the art of transforming ignorance into discovery, questions into sparks, confusion into a path. If you think about it, the most fascinating thing about childhood is precisely curiosity. Children never stop asking questions. They challenge the obvious. They dare to ask what adults no longer even consider. Why is the sky blue? What would happen if we could breathe underwater? Where does music go when no one is singing? That hunger for knowledge isn't about finding definitive answers. It's about the joy of opening doors. As we grow, education systems, routine, and fear of error extinguish that flame. We learn that it's better to appear confident than to seem ignorant, and so we stop asking. Yet creative genius doesn't lie in those who flaunt certainties, but in those who keep the audacity to doubt. The Russian composer Igor Stravinsky understood this alchemy of curiosity in his own way. It's said that when he felt blocked, he would sit at the piano and play the same dissonant chord up to 100 times in a row. He didn't do it to please the ear or to produce instant beauty, but to free his mind from rigidity. Each repetition was a way to explore the noise until he discovered what lay beyond the disorder. That practice, absurd to many, was in fact his way of keeping curiosity alive. What happens if I persist in what others consider unbearable? What opens after discomfort? Stravinsky knew that musical innovation doesn't emerge from accepted harmony, but from the persistent question that challenges the ear. Thus, he turned creative block into a laboratory of possibilities. The same happens in our daily lives. We often avoid dissonance, problems, and contradictions because we prefer the comfort of the familiar. But if we always stay within the easy melody, we never discover what lies beyond. Curiosity demands that we tolerate confusion, just as Stravinsky tolerated the discomfort of repeating a harsh sound. It demands that we hold the question without rushing toward a quick answer. And when we manage to remain in that threshold, something opens, the space where creativity finds its voice. Nature offers extraordinary examples of this alchemy. Few creatures are as fascinating as the axolotl, an amphibian native to Mexico. At first glance, it looks like an odd little salamander, with external gills like feathery plumes and a perpetual smile. But what makes it unique is its astonishing ability to regenerate, not only lost limbs, but also parts of vital organs, even fragments of its brain. Where other species see an end, the axolotl sees a chance to begin again. Its body does not surrender to injury, it transforms it into renewal. The axolotl is a living metaphor for applied curiosity. Instead of resigning itself to limitation, it asks, "How can I continue?" That question becomes a biological answer. That doubt becomes adaptation. When we look at the axolotl, we understand that creativity works the same way. It is not about denying loss or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about turning it into the root of something new. A failure can regenerate into learning. a fall into momentum, a lack into opportunity. The key is not to close the question too soon. The ancient Vikings had a peculiar way of relating to the unknown. They carved runes into stone, wood, or bone, not just as a writing system, but as a kind of creative spell. Each sign was not merely a letter, but a symbol charged with magical meaning. For them, writing runes was a way of invoking forces, of conversing with the invisible, of daring to name what they did not yet understand. From our modern point of view, it may seem superstitious, but there is something profoundly revealing in that act, transforming curiosity into symbol, the unseen into mark, doubt into sign. It was an act of cultural alchemy. They refused to merely accept mystery. They explored it through the creation of symbols that gave shape to the ineffable. If we bring together Stravinsky, the axolotl, and the Vikings, we find a single thread, curiosity that refuses to settle for the obvious. The musician repeats the unbearable until new music emerges. The creature turns its wound into regeneration. The Norse carver etches symbols to speak with the unknown. In every case, doubt does not paralyze, it propels. Curiosity is not a luxury for restless minds. It is the natural mechanism that allows us to survive, adapt, and create. So how do we recover that spark in a world that rewards certainty and quick answers? The first step is to make peace with not knowing, to dare to say, "I don't know," without feeling weak, because in that phrase, true strength begins. Then, to practice doubt as a daily exercise. What other way could this be done? What happens if I reverse the order? What lies behind this apparent certainty? Curiosity is like a muscle. The more we use it, the more it expands. And like the axolotl, the more we test it, the greater our mind's ability to regenerate becomes. Remember that curiosity doesn't always lead to immediate results. Often, its fruits appear only after a period of incubation. Just as Stravinsky's music seemed chaotic before becoming a masterpiece, our questions may sound absurd before revealing their meaning. That's why it's vital to trust the process. Doubt is fertile even when it yields no visible results, because it keeps the mental soil open and ready for the unexpected. The alchemy of curiosity lies in accepting uncertainty as a laboratory. Just as the Vikings carved runes to converse with the invisible, we can use our questions as symbols that guide us through darkness. Just as the axolotl turns injury into regeneration, we can transform obstacles into raw material for growth. Just as Stravinsky explored dissonance, we can embrace confusion as the doorway to the new. After all, the creative genius is not the one who knows everything, but the one who dares to doubt everything. In a world that rewards immediacy and easy answers, reclaiming the art of curiosity is almost an act of rebellion. It means allowing ourselves to look again with childlike wonder, to hold questions without fear, to accept dissonance and discomfort as pathways. In doing so, we awaken a force that transforms doubt into discovery and ignorance into spark. That is true alchemy, turning uncertainty into mental gold. And you have that power, because no mind can help but burn when it is ignited by questions. All it takes is to feed the fire, not with certainties, but with doubts. Chapter 4. The Power of Unlearning. Stagnant water soon begins to smell. So too does the mind that does not move. Persian proverb. The hardest thing is not to learn something new, but to let go of the old. Our minds cling to ideas as if they were inherited possessions we must keep, even when they're covered in dust. Just as still water eventually rots, so does the mind that hoards certainties and never questions them. It begins to lose freshness, vitality, and brilliance. Nothing is more dangerous to creativity than rigid thinking, because rigidity turns intelligence into repetition. Unlearning is an uncomfortable verb, I admit, but it's the one that creates the space the mind needs to move again. From childhood, we absorb beliefs, formulas, and explanations that stay with us for years. Some serve as tools, others become chains. Growing up also means examining those structures and daring to discard them when they no longer work. Yet, almost no one teaches us how to do that. School rewards those who memorize, not those who question. Society admires those who appear certain, not those who dare to say, "I'm no longer so sure." And so we keep storing old certainties like furniture that no longer fits in our mental house until there's barely room left to walk. The philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal understood this struggle as a lifelong exercise. It said he always carried in his pocket a small piece of paper with two phrases written on it: "God exists" and "God does not exist." He did this to remind himself that absolute certainty is an illusion, and that human life always moves between doubt and faith, between possibility and uncertainty. That paper was not a trivial gesture. It was a physical reminder that the mind must live within the tension of the unresolved. Pascal forced himself to coexist with the open question because he knew that clinging to one side of the scale means closing the door to mystery, and closing the door to mystery is closing the door to learning. Unlearning is much like what Pascal did, questioning the phrases carved in stone. It doesn't mean rejecting everything we've learned, but rather examining which parts are still alive and which have become stagnant water. Sometimes creativity doesn't require adding more information. It requires daring to empty the cup a little. After all, what good is a cup filled to the brim if there's no room for new tea? Our mind works the same way. When it's full of certainties, there's no space left for the unexpected. Nature gives us perfect metaphors for understanding the power of unlearning. Think of the desert seeds that lie buried beneath the sand for decades, even a century, hidden and dormant. They do not sprout, no matter how fiercely the sun burns or the winds blow. They appear dead, but they're waiting. Somehow, mysteriously, they know that expending energy is pointless until the rains arrive. Then, when the first drops finally fall, they awaken with astonishing strength and cover the desert in flowers. The wonder is that, to reach that explosion of life, they had to endure emptiness, patience, and stillness. Desert seeds teach us that wisdom sometimes lies not in accumulation, but in release. It's not about producing endlessly without pause, but about knowing how to wait until the conditions change. And above all, that apparent non-growth is not failure, it's preparation. In the human mind, that waiting time is the space of unlearning, shedding what no longer serves, suspending old ways of thinking, trusting that the rain of a new idea will come. If we don't leave space, the rain will fall on hard ground, and nothing will grow. Mental stagnation often disguises itself as success. We believe that because something worked once, it will always work. But what was useful in the past can become an obstacle in the present. Just as yesterday's fresh water can smell foul today, yesterday's certainties can become cages that keep us from moving. To unlearn is to have the courage to say, "This no longer serves me." And that act, which may feel like a loss, is actually an act of freedom. The danger of not unlearning is ending up living from empty formulas. It's like writing a poem with the same words over and over, or cooking with the same ingredients long after they've lost their flavor. The mind needs constant renewal. That's why the Persian proverb is so precise. The mind that doesn't move decays. And to move, it's not enough to add more. You must also know how to let go. The creative genius is not merely the one who accumulates knowledge, but the one who dares to question it. Einstein, Picasso, Marie Curie, all of them, at some point, were destroyers of old certainties. They didn't just learn what was established, they dismantled it. and that dismantling was what opened the door to the new. Unlearning, in this sense, is a form of mental cleansing, a kind of intellectual hygiene that prevents the mind from becoming a cluttered, useless storeroom. If we think again of Pascal and his note in the pocket, we understand that the true sage is not the one who clings desperately to certainty, but the one who accepts the tension of perhaps. That perhaps is the fertile ground of creativity, for where nothing is settled, everything is possible. And the mind that dares to live in the possible stays in motion, fresh as running water. Perhaps the hardest part of all this is overcoming pride. It's difficult to admit that something we once believed no longer makes sense. It's uncomfortable to accept that we must begin again. But pride is the great enemy of learning. When we release that weight, we discover that unlearning doesn't diminish us, it expands us. The seed that chooses not to sprout too soon doesn't lose strength. It stores it, waiting for the right moment. The power of unlearning lies in understanding that letting go is not emptiness, but preparation. That doubt is not weakness, but movement. That breaking old certainties is not losing direction, but opening invisible paths. And that water, to stay fresh, must always flow forward. The mind must too. If you wish to awaken your creative genius, remember this lesson. Don't hoard certainties like old furniture. Don't let your mind become stagnant water. Dare to doubt, to question, to release. Keep in your pocket, like Pascal, a reminder that everything could be otherwise. Wait like the desert seed. Trust that the rain will come, and when it does, you will bloom with the strength of one who knew how to prepare in silence. Chapter 5. Creativity in its purest form. A man with imagination is never alone, not even if he lives in a desert. Greek proverb. True creativity carries a kind of secret companionship. When imagination ignites, solitude dissolves, the walls open up, and voices, images, and melodies begin to fill the inner space. That's why the Greek proverb says so clearly that a man with imagination is never alone. He carries within him an entire universe to converse with. Creativity in its purest form is that ability to hold a dialogue with the invisible, to populate the mind with realities that do not yet exist, and to shape them until they can touch the world. But it's not enough to simply want to be creative. The ground must be prepared. The spark appears in those who cultivate rituals, habits, and stimuli that allow the mind to step outside the ordinary. Some of these rituals are extravagant, others simple, but all serve the same purpose, to open the door to the unexpected. The composer Ludwig van Beethoven, for instance, had a peculiar ritual he performed before sitting down to compose. He would plunge his head into cold water, convinced that the shock would awaken his mind and free him from the heaviness of routine. It wasn't an eccentric whim. It was his way of forcing his body and brain into another state, a state of alertness that drew him closer to creation. While others sought inspiration in walks or readings, he sought it in the jolt of the icy, and from that strange habit were born works that continue to move millions to this day. Beethoven's detail shows us that pure creativity doesn't always feed on comfort. It often arises from a small disruption, from a stimulus that breaks normality and forces the mind to look differently. The same is true in nature. Think of the flamingos, those dreamlike birds of soft pink. Curiously, they are not born with that color. When they hatch, they are gray and pale. Their pink hue develops over time, not by genetics, but through diet. The pigments from the crustaceans and algae they consume tint their feathers with that distinctive color. In other words, their environment shapes their beauty. What makes them unique doesn't come from their origin, but from what they take in and transform. Flamingos remind us that human creativity also depends on the nourishment we give our minds. If we only consume what everyone else does, our colors fade. But if we feed ourselves with diverse readings, unexpected conversations, and experiences outside routine, our minds will gradually become tinted with new shades. Imagination turns pink when we dare to eat differently, when we nourish ourselves with the unknown. Thus, the external becomes internal, and the internal becomes creation. That same connection between environment and creation appears in a little-known curiosity, the Ge'ez alphabet, still used in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Its characters are not arbitrary strokes. They were designed to evoke the sounds of nature. Each letter carries a resonance with the living world, as if writing were a way of imitating the whisper of the wind or the growl of an animal. It wasn't a cold code, but a bridge between the human and the natural. One who wrote in Ge'ez wasn't merely communicating words, they were invoking echoes of the world. There, creativity was not about inventing from nothing, but about listening and translating what was already vibrating around them. Looking at Beethoven with his ritual of icy water, the flamingos who are colored by what they eat, and the Ge'ez alphabet that captures the voices of nature, we see that creativity in its purest form is never an isolated phenomenon. It is a dialogue between the inner and the outer. The solitary imagination can invent worlds, yes, but it needs collision with reality to avoid losing itself in empty fantasy. That's why the creator's solitude is never complete. It is always accompanied by the stimuli gathered, the nourishment consumed, the symbols inherited from culture. We often think creativity demands absolute originality, as if it meant creating from nothing. But in truth, it is more akin to a process of transformation. Just as flamingos transform algae into color, we transform experiences into ideas. Just as the Ge'ez alphabet transforms natural sounds into letters, we transform intuition into words, images, or projects. Just as Beethoven transformed the shock of cold water into music, we too can transform a simple stimulus into a creative spark. Creativity in its purest form happens when we let ourselves be pierced by all of this without rigid filters, when we open ourselves to the strange and make it our own, when we recognize that imagination doesn't isolate us from the world but connects us to it more deeply. A man with imagination is never alone, because within him live the colors of what he's experienced, the echoes of what he's heard, the symbols he's inherited, the gestures he's felt. The beauty of this process is that it never repeats itself in the same way twice. Two flamingos may eat the same food, yet their plumage won't be identical. Two musicians may hear the same melody, yet they will interpret it differently. Two cultures may inhabit the same landscape, yet they will design different alphabets. Pure creativity is not about imitation, it's about filtering nourishment through one's own uniqueness. The difference between one creator and another is not in what they receive, but in how they metabolize it. And here lies the key for anyone who wishes to awaken their inner genius. Stop searching for external formulas to tell you how to be creative. Start by examining what you're consuming, how you're feeding your mind, how you're shaking your routine. Ask yourself whether your mental plumage remains gray because you always feed on the same things, or whether it's time to dive, like Beethoven, into a different kind of water that jolts your spirit awake. Explore foreign alphabets, unfamiliar sounds, new flavors. Creativity in its purest form isn't magic, it's selective nourishment and constant transformation. Deep down, we all carry that secret companionship the Greek proverb speaks of. We are never alone if we have imagination, because imagination turns an empty room into a stage, silence into melody, a blank page into a universe. The real question is whether we dare to tend that fire, to feed it fresh fuel, to keep it from dying in monotony. Those who dare discover that creativity is not a forced effort, but a natural state, as natural as the pink of the flamingo or Beethoven's instinctive plunge into cold water before he wrote. Creativity in its purest form is life itself expressing through us. It is accepting that we are connected to everything around us, and that our task is to translate it, color it, and return it to the world in the form of art, gesture, or idea. It is trusting that we are never alone, because imagination is always with us. And when we understand that, we begin to live with the certainty that each day can take on a new color, sound with a new note, and be written with a new symbol. Chapter 6. Breaking Patterns, Creating Paths. He who always walks the straight path never sees new landscapes. Chinese proverb. Life constantly invites us to follow safe, predictable, pre-marked routes. It's more comfortable to walk a straight road than to venture into an uncertain trail full of curves, forks, and obstacles. But the straight road rarely surprises. It almost never reveals new horizons. Those who always follow it discover nothing beyond what they already knew. Creativity, on the other hand, demands deviation. It asks us to risk getting lost, to explore. It is not born from repetition, but from rupture. That is why creators, in every field, often seem disobedient. They refuse to walk only where others claim it's safe. Breaking patterns doesn't mean destroying everything that exists. It means daring to look beyond the predictable. The poet, the inventor, the scientist, the entrepreneur, they all find the new when they decide that the map is not enough, when they dare to cross the line of the established. Straightness offers order, yes, but it also offers monotony, and nothing kills the spark as quickly as monotony. A revealing example can be found in the life of Emily Dickinson, the enigmatic American poet who wrote more than 1,800 poems, many of them never intended for publication. Dickinson had a unique relationship with the creative act. She didn't wait for perfect materials or ideal circumstances. She wrote anywhere, on anything. Many of her poems were found on recycled envelopes, scraps of correspondence, fragments of discarded paper. Inspiration doesn't wait, she said through her actions. She preferred to break the pattern of material perfection rather than lose the spark of the moment. Her poetry slipped into the margins of life, into the quiet gaps of the everyday, into the interstices others would have deemed unsuitable. Dickinson reminds us that creating new paths doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it's born from small rebellions against the tyranny of absolute order. As always, nature offers extraordinary models for understanding this creative flexibility. The octopus is a remarkable creature because it can change both color and texture in a matter of seconds. It doesn't cling to a single pattern. Its skin is a living canvas that responds to the environment. When faced with a predator, it camouflages with the rocks. When hunting, it becomes a moving shadow. Some even imitate the appearance of other sea creatures to confuse observers. This ability to transform isn't a whim, it's survival. The octopus stays alive because it refuses to cling to a single form, because it doesn't believe there's only one way to be. Its secret is plasticity. If we apply the octopus's lesson to human creativity, the message is clear. Clinging to a single way of thinking, a single style, a single path makes us vulnerable and predictable. To be creative is to have the flexibility to change our mental color and texture when the moment calls for it, not to pretend or to please, but to adapt and to discover. The new emerges when we stop protecting fixed forms and allow ourselves to explore variations. Rigidity is the enemy of invention. Flexibility, its most powerful ally. Breaking patterns also means challenging the belief that there's only one right way to do things. Dickinson wrote on recycled envelopes, and her poetry reached heights that still move readers today. Beethoven drenched his head in cold water before composing. Turner tied himself to a mast in the middle of a storm. Stravinsky repeated dissonant chords to the point of obsession. All of them knew that the straight path, the one that waits for perfect conditions, the one that obeys approved methods, rarely leads to new landscapes. Creativity lives in detours, in margins, in the decisions that seem irrational but open unheard of trails. The mental herd always seeks the safety of the marked road. Do it the way it's always been done. Don't create problems. Follow the instructions. And yet no great work, no decisive discovery, no transformative invention ever emerged from blind obedience to those voices. Someone, somewhere, had to risk walking a different path, to break with what was established, to make mistakes in order to find the unexpected. Every innovation, from fire to the internet, is the fruit of someone who refused to walk the straight line. The paradox is that breaking patterns doesn't necessarily mean living in chaos. It means having the courage to combine order with deviation, structure with improvisation. Emily Dickinson wrote with fierce discipline, yet she did it on scraps of recycled paper. The octopus can transform into any texture, but always does so with adaptive logic. Creativity is not total anarchy. It is balance, knowing what to hold and what to break. The straight line is the starting point, not the prison. In daily life, each of us can train this habit. Ask yourself, what pattern am I repeating without questioning it? What would I do differently if I dared to bend the road? It can be as simple as taking a new route to work, trying a new tool, reading a genre you've never considered, or talking to someone whose vision contradicts your own. These small gestures are like recycled envelopes for writing poems. They may seem insignificant, but they ignite new mental pathways. The octopus reminds us that creativity is not only about creating something outside ourselves, it's also about reinventing who we are, changing our mental color and texture when the situation requires it. And that plasticity, far from weakening us, strengthens us. Just as the sea creature survives through its camouflage, we survive and thrive through our ability to adapt, to break molds, to stop being what is expected and become what life needs. Ultimately, breaking patterns means opening ourselves to the unknown without fear. It means recognizing that straightness offers safety, but curves offer discovery. It means daring to be like Dickinson, who preferred the imperfect spark over lifeless perfection. It means accepting the lesson of the octopus. Fixed form is limitation, metamorphosis is power. It means understanding, as the old Chinese proverb says, that he who always follows the straight path will never see new landscapes. Creativity, in its purest form, does not feed on repeating what we already know. It feeds on walking toward what we do not yet know. Breaking patterns is not a whim. It is the only way to discover paths that do not yet exist. And the creative genius within each of us is waiting for just that. For us to stop following the comfort of the straight line and to dare to draw our own route, with the boldness of one who longs to see new landscapes, even when no map can guarantee them. Chapter 7. Between Paradoxes and Revelations. Creativity lives at the edges, where logic breaks down and the obvious becomes uncertain. It is in those spaces that paradoxes are born, enigmas that seem impossible yet carry within them a seed of truth. One of the most famous was posed by the philosopher Bertrand Russell and is known as the barber paradox. In an imaginary village, there is a barber who shaves all the men who do not shave themselves. The question is, who shaves the barber? If he shaves himself, then he belongs to the group of men who shave themselves, and therefore should not be shaved by the barber. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must be shaved by the barber, that is, by himself. The paradox has no exit. It bites its own tail like an eternal serpent. And yet, beyond being a clever riddle, it hides a profound lesson. Reality doesn't always fit neatly into closed boxes, and not everything can be solved with exact formulas. Paradoxes open cracks in mental rigidity. They force us to think non-linearly, to accept complexity, and to search for new ways of seeing. The world of creativity feeds precisely on those cracks. The inventor, the artist, the thinker, they are all people who know how to live among contradictions without fleeing from them. They see in paradox not an obstacle, but a playground. When linear thought hits a wall, creative thought looks for a secret passage, and often finds it, not because it resolves the paradox, but because it transforms it into a revelation. The impossible becomes fertile the moment we stop demanding perfect coherence. The story of Caroline Herschel shines as a luminous example of how a life's paradox can turn into discovery. Born in 18th century Hanover into a modest family, she seemed destined for invisibility. A woman in an age when science was reserved for men, small in stature and frail in health, everything was against her. And yet, that condition of impossible did not stop her. She accompanied her brother William Herschel, a recognized astronomer, in his research, but soon developed her own passion. Lacking great resources, she began hand-polishing fragments of mirror to build her own telescopes. What seemed absurd, a solitary woman working endless hours over glass and metal, became her doorway to the heavens. With those imperfect instruments, she discovered comets and nebulae, and became recognized as the first professional woman astronomer in history. Caroline Herschel's paradox was clear. Everything suggested she didn't belong in the world of science, yet instead of fleeing from that contradiction, she inhabited it until it became her strength. Where others would have seen an insurmountable limit, she saw a challenge. With patience and faith in the invisible, she transformed impossibility into revelation. Her story reminds us that creative thinking can turn even the most contradictory situations into sources of light. Light. That word leads us to another marvel that sounds like a metaphor, but is real. Byzantine mosaics, so characteristic of churches and basilicas between the 5th and 15th centuries, did not use pure gold to represent the divine. Instead, they used golden glass, tiny fragments of glass covered with a thin sheet of gold and embedded into the walls. The result was astonishing. When sunlight entered or a lamp was lit, those tesserae reflected the light in a shimmering way, as if they truly radiated the sacred. It wasn't the gold itself that dazzled, but the ingenuity of using a humble material in an unexpected way to evoke transcendence. The lesson is clear. Creativity often doesn't emerge from the most expensive or complex resources, but from the ability to see the extraordinary within the ordinary. The Byzantine mosaic didn't shine because of its material, but because of its play of reflections. Herschel didn't have state-of-the-art telescopes, but she turned polished fragments into windows to the universe. The barber's paradox has no resolution, but in its impossibility, it forces us to think differently. In every case, the essential element is not the perfection of the medium, but the openness of the mind to the unexpected. If you think about it, the barber's paradox can easily be applied to everyday life. How often do we feel trapped in dilemmas with no way out? If I do this, I'll be wrong. If I don't, I'll still be wrong. If I take the risk, I lose. If I don't, I'll never win. Instead of despairing, we can learn to inhabit those contradictions as Caroline Herschel did, to use the impossible as creative fuel. A paradox isn't meant to be solved, it's meant to be transformed. And in that transformation, we find new paths. Breaking linear patterns and embracing paradox is, at its core, an act of humility. It means accepting that reality isn't simple, that logic has limits, that life contains contradictions. The rigid mind suffers under this truth, for it craves definitive answers. The creative mind, however, plays with it, finding pleasure in uncertainty, turning confusion into movement. The beauty of Byzantine mosaics worked the same way. They were not smooth or uniform, but irregular fragments that, when struck by light, produced a breathtaking effect. The goal was never linear perfection. The revelation lay within the irregularity itself. Paradox and revelation always walk hand in hand. Every time we encounter an apparent limit, an unsolvable contradiction, we have two choices: frustration or awakening to what that tension wants to teach us. Russell's Barber, Caroline Herschel, the Byzantine artisans, all whisper the same truth. The impossible is not always meant to be solved, but it can always be transformed into a window to the unseen. In a world that worships quick answers and clear formulas, daring to dwell in paradox is almost an act of rebellion. It means not fleeing confusion, but turning it into an ally. It means accepting that creativity is not a straight line, but a mosaic of fragments, reflections, and contradictions that together form a dazzling image. And then we understand, creativity is not about fleeing chaos, but learning to dance with it. A paradox is not a dead end, it is a crossroads. A piece of glass can shine like gold, a hand-polished mirror can reveal galaxies. Even an absurd dilemma can become the seed of revelation. It is there, between paradoxes and revelations, that the creative mind finds its true strength. Chapter 8. The Power of the Unexpected. No matter how much we try to plan, organize, and control, life always finds a way to surprise us with twists that weren't in the script. The unexpected can be frightening, but it can also become a vast source of creative power. The greatest breakthroughs, the most memorable works, and the deepest revelations often appear at the least calculated moment. Far from being an enemy, the unexpected is one of the most fertile forces of the human mind. The story of the French mathematician Évariste Galois is one of the most dramatic examples of how the unexpected can unleash an immense legacy. He was only 20, his short life marked by political and personal turmoil. Challenged to a duel he knew would be fatal, he spent the night before feverishly writing down all his mathematical ideas in letters and notebooks. In those desperate hours, he condensed what would later become the foundation of group theory, a cornerstone of modern algebra. He died the next day, yet what he left behind continues to live, transforming how we understand mathematical structures. Galois' genius emerged precisely in that moment of urgency, in the brutal awareness that there was no time. His story is tragic, but also illuminating. The unexpected can force us to bring forth what might otherwise have remained asleep within us. Nature, too, shows how the unexpected can sustain life under extreme conditions. In Antarctica, there exist lichens capable of remaining frozen for centuries, apparently dead, until they receive a few drops of water and return to life. Their resilience is astonishing. What seemed inert and irreversible is in fact full of latent potential. This capacity to awaken after such prolonged stillness is a powerful metaphor for creativity. Sometimes ideas seem buried, cold, without future, but a single unexpected spark, a conversation, an image, an accident, an emotion, can bring them roaring back to life. Like those lichens, our minds hold dormant treasures, waiting only for the right spark to reawaken. The unexpected doesn't always arrive through grand gestures or in moments of survival. It also hides within the details of everyday life. A curious example comes from 15th century Europe. Many medieval clocks, even those in towers and cathedrals, did not mark minutes, only hours. In a world that moved slowly and spaciously, the obsessive precision we take for granted today simply didn't exist. Minutes were irrelevant to agricultural work, artisanal trades, or domestic life. That lack of accuracy, which to us might seem like a flaw, was in truth a different way of perceiving time. And that perspective reminds us of something essential. not everything we consider necessary truly is. The unexpected may consist in discovering that what seems obvious is merely a cultural construction, that even our way of measuring time is relative. Who can say that seeing life in leaps of an hour instead of pulses of seconds did not allow more room for calm and imagination? History and science are full of moments when the unexpected became the catalyst for discovery. Marie Curie, pioneer of radioactivity research, used to keep mineral samples that emitted a faint glow in her desk drawers. She did not do it out of carelessness, but out of fascination. She was mesmerized by their mysterious light. Those eerie radiances, which we now know were dangerous, enchanted her and fed her curiosity. The unexpected glow became the spark of inquiry. Curie did not see a mere oddity. She saw an invitation to explore. That fascination led her to discover elements such as polonium and radium, opening a field of study that would forever change science. Her story teaches us that the unexpected can be unsettling, even perilous, but it can also ignite a flame capable of illuminating entire worlds. When we embrace it, the unexpected breaks the mold of the predictable. It forces us to let go of our illusion of control and to stand face to face with mystery. It can arrive as tragedy, as rebirth, as a cultural revelation, or as luminous wonder. In every case, the key lies in our response. We can close ourselves off and resist, or open up and allow it to transform us. The creative mind does not merely tolerate the unexpected, it seeks it, provokes it. The inventor exposes himself to error, knowing that within a mistake may lie a discovery. The artist experiments with strange materials, aware that beauty may arise from imperfection. The scientist patiently observes the inexplicable, sensing that within it, a hidden law may be waiting. The unexpected is not a threat. It is an ally. The problem is that we have learned to fear what we cannot control. We crave clocks that measure seconds, routines plotted to the minute, detailed plans for every outcome. Yet the tighter we grip life, the less space we leave for surprise. The power of the unexpected lies in reminding us that not everything depends on us, and that precisely in that margin of uncertainty, the most valuable things can emerge. Creativity requires that space of openness, that willingness to be interrupted by what we did not foresee. Looking back, many of the moments that defined our lives were unexpected. A chance meeting, a fleeting conversation, a mistake that turned into opportunity. The same is true of human history, the accidental discovery of penicillin, failed experiments that opened new fields, seemingly small gestures that changed the course of culture. The unexpected frightens us because it breaks our script, but it is also the only thing capable of writing new chapters. To accept the unexpected is not to surrender to passivity, it is to keep the mind flexible enough to turn surprise into momentum. It is to learn to see in error a laboratory, in loss a change of course, in the mysterious glow of a stone, an entire realm of research. It is ultimately to trust that the universe is wider than we can ever predict. The stories of Galois, the Antarctic lichens, the medieval clocks, and Marie Curie all reveal that the unexpected wears many faces. It can be tragic, fascinating, subtle, or transformative, but in every case, when we know how to welcome it, it becomes strength. And that strength, far from leading us away from our inner genius, brings us closer to it. Because creativity, in its deepest essence, is the ability to turn the unexpected into revelation. Chapter 9. The Inner Genius in Motion. Creativity is not an isolated flash, nor an occasional spark that appears from time to time. It is, rather, a continuous movement, an underground river that flows and transforms without end. When we learn to listen to that movement, we discover that the inner genius does not dwell in the rigidity of a perfect moment, but in the constant dance between the visible and the invisible, the rational and the intuitive, the logical, and the mysterious. A luminous example of this dance can be found in the figure of Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century Benedictine nun who was a composer, philosopher, physician, and mystic. For her, music was not merely an audible art, but an inner revelation she described as inner lights. Her visions overflowed with colors and brilliance, and through those inner landscapes she composed hymns and chants that are still performed today. What is remarkable about Hildegard is that she saw her creative genius not as something born of conscious will, but as a current flowing through her. She did not see herself as an isolated author, but as a channel for something greater. Her life shows that the inner genius is not an object to possess, but a movement in which one immerses oneself. This idea of inner movement connects with a paradox known since the Middle Ages, Buridan's donkey. The story tells of a donkey placed between two identical piles of hay who dies of hunger because it cannot decide which one to choose. Its indecision condemns it, trapped in an absurd balance between two equal options. This paradox, beyond being a tale, reflects a common human problem, paralysis in the face of doubt. When we remain motionless, endlessly analyzing, waiting for the perfect choice, we end up losing the chance to act. Buridan's donkey dies not from lack of food, but from lack of movement, and creativity works the same way. The inner genius dries up when it stagnates, waiting for perfection. The key is not to choose perfectly, but to move, to act, to try, to flow. Nature, an inexhaustible teacher of lessons, offers us a fascinating mirror of this principle. Dolphins, creatures of remarkable intelligence, invent games purely for fun. They toss seaweed to each other, create bubbles to chase, or even drag marine objects as if they were balls. The most surprising part is that these inventions don't remain with one individual. They are transmitted culturally within the group. What one dolphin creates, another learns and replicates, and over time, that play becomes part of the group's shared repertoire. Dolphin creativity is not conceived as something static, but as a shared movement, a living flow that passes from one to another. Hildegard, the dolphins, and the donkey's paradox converge on the same teaching. The inner genius does not exist in stillness. It is born of movement, of action, of the willingness to be carried by what flows. Those who eternally wait for the perfect moment end up like the donkey, trapped in doubt. Those who trust in the inner lights that emerge, like Hildegard, discover unforeseen paths. Those who play and share, like the dolphins, turn creativity into something alive that multiplies. And here arises a key reflection. We often believe that creativity requires total control, exhaustive planning, absolute certainty. But in reality, the inner genius ignites when we allow ourselves to improvise, to act without guarantees, to take steps that might lead to mistakes, but always keep us away from paralysis. Movement, even clumsy movement, is preferable to brilliant rigidity. Hildegard's music was not born of calculation, but of surrender to the flow. The dolphins' games were not born of planning, but of spontaneity. The donkey's paradox reminds us that excessive analysis can be just as sterile as a lack of resources. Life itself is movement. The heart beats without rest, the breath never ceases, thoughts flow like endless rivers. To pretend that the inner genius is a fixed state is to go against the essence of existence. The creator who clings to a single formula ends up exhausting it. The one who opens to movement, on the other hand, constantly renews their current. And here lies the difference between those who remain trapped in a single style and those who reinvent their work again and again. They do not fear the flow, they embrace it. The movement of the inner genius also manifests as contagion. Just as dolphins transmit their games, we share ideas, gestures, intuitions. A conversation can ignite a spark in another person. A work of art can awaken a chain of creations. The inner genius does not belong solely to the individual. It is part of a collective movement that crosses generations. Hildegard understood this well. Her music was not only hers, it was part of a universal song. Accepting this movement means letting go of perfection. It means choosing, even without certainty, so as not to die of creative hunger like the donkey. It means playing, like the dolphins, without worrying about immediate usefulness. It means listening to the inner lights, even if we cannot explain them precisely. The inner genius ignites when we stop demanding formulas and allow ourselves to dance with its current. Thus, the real challenge is not to discover whether we possess creative genius, but to learn how to keep it in motion. It is not a statue to be admired, but a river to be crossed. Not a hidden treasure, but a dance to be practiced. And the more we move with it, the more we realize that we are not alone in that flow. Every spark we ignite spreads. Every game we invent can travel. Every inner revelation echoes in others. The inner genius in motion saves us from paralysis, connects us with others, and reminds us that life itself is a work in progress. All we need is the courage to move, even if we don't know the exact direction. Because as Hildegard shows, as the dolphins teach, as the donkey's paradox warns, what matters is not the final destination, but the current that never stops flowing. Chapter 10. Beyond the limits. The world presents us with limits, of time, of logic, of culture, of circumstance, but the inner genius knows that these limits are not final walls, but thresholds to be crossed. When we approach them with imagination, we discover that beyond them there is always fertile ground, a space where the impossible begins to turn real. A curiosity that illustrates this mystery is chess. This ancient game, seemingly simple and within anyone's reach, contains an almost infinite universe. Mathematical estimates suggest that there are more possible positions in a chess game than atoms in the observable universe. Each move opens branches that multiply to dizzying proportions. It reminds us that what appears limited can contain the unlimited in essence. The same is true of the mind. With just a few pieces, words, images, memories, it can generate combinations beyond any calculation. The inner genius, like chess, does not depend on infinite resources, but on the fearless exploration of possibilities that unfold with every step. The lives of certain creators reflect this very principle, transforming limitation into an entire universe. Jorge Luis Borges, one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, worked for years in an unremarkable job as an inspector of poultry in a Buenos Aires market. His days passed among cages and commotion, far from literary circles. Yet, amid that seemingly grey routine, Borges silently wrote stories that would later dazzle the world, tales where the infinite, the labyrinthine, and the imaginary became tangible. The contrast is revealing. A man surrounded by ordinary birds in a minor bureaucratic post was crafting infinite literary universes. Borges shows us that beyond external limits, one can always open an inner door. The context doesn't matter. What's essential is the mind's readiness to go beyond. But the path toward the limitless is not always linear or clear. It often resembles a paradox, like that of the candle, which, when lit, not only gives light, but also casts more shadows. We think light eliminates darkness, yet in striking a flame, we multiply shadows in corners once uniform. Creativity works the same way. Every revelation brings new questions, every clarity new mysteries. Going beyond limits does not mean erasing all shadows, but learning to live with them, to accept that brilliance brings complexity. The paradox of the candle teaches us that progress is not the absence of uncertainty, but its illumination from different angles. This tension between light and shadow, between boundary and expansion, also appears in the experience of Maya Angelou, the great American poet and storyteller. Angelou had a peculiar writing ritual. She would rent empty hotel rooms containing nothing but a bed, a dictionary, coffee, and water. There she isolated herself from every noise and distraction, convinced that austere solitude freed her inner voice. She needed no luxury or comfort, only a bare space where imagination could unfold without limits. That practice reveals something essential. Sometimes we must reduce the external to its minimum so that the internal can expand to the infinite. In those stripped-down rooms, Angelou opened vast inner spaces of memory, pain, and beauty that she transformed into immortal words. Chess with its infinite possibilities, Borges writing among birds, the candle multiplying shadows, and Maya Angelou in her empty room all converge in one message. Going beyond limits is not denying their existence, but transforming them into points of departure. Each limit contains within it the seed of the unlimited. The bounded chessboard holds an immeasurable cosmos. Borges's routine hid literary labyrinths. The candle's light reveals as much as it conceals, and Angelou's austere solitude was as fertile as an inner ocean. The creative genius within us awakens when we learn to see in this way, not asking what we lack, but what we can do with what we already have. Not lamenting the shadows, but learning to move the light differently. Not waiting for the environment to change, but opening within ourselves a space that transcends it. The limit is real, but perspective can turn it into a horizon. Life will always test us, with work that seems routine, with scarce resources, with doubts that paralyze, with empty spaces that seem inhospitable. But the Creator does not stop at the surface. They know that even in the smallest things there is a universe, that even in routine there are stories, that even in shadow there are revelations. The Creator does not fear limits because they understand that each one is a reminder that the infinite hides just beyond. To go beyond limits means to trust that there is always one more step, one more idea, one more spark. It means accepting that it's not about reaching an absolute end, but living in a constant process of expansion. Every time we choose to move a different piece on the board, every time we allow ourselves to write amid routine, every time we light a flame that casts new shadows, every time we close a hotel door to open the doors of imagination, we move closer to that territory where the inner genius awakens in fullness. And perhaps that is the great revelation. Limits never truly disappear, but they cease to be prisons when we learn to see them as thresholds. Beyond them lies not a fixed destination, but an endless journey. Creativity does not seek closure, it seeks openings. It does not seek certainty, it seeks paths. It does not seek to erase shadows, it seeks to learn how to dance with them. Thus, the inner genius becomes a constant companion, a fire that never goes out because it always finds a new horizon to move toward. Beyond the limits lies not the impossible, but the not yet attempted, and that not yet is the most powerful promise, that as long as we live, there will always be another movement, another idea, another revelation waiting to be discovered. You have just listened to Beyond the Limits, Awaken the Creative Genius Within You, an original work by Oscar Gonzalez, created for Biblio Studio. Dear listener, thank you for joining us. With gratitude and blessings,